Okay, hi everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's session. And so today we are going to start off our new career exploration seminar series. And this is a series of conversations that we will be having on a monthly basis, Tuesday. And the dates, I'll share the dates later on, at least about the second or so Tuesday each month. And the idea is that we're going to have students, alumni, practitioners in the field share their experiences, share some insights specifically around topics. And so today's topic is, so you want to be an ombuds. And so leading off this series is my dear friend, my colleague, my mentor, my friend, David Smith. David is adjunct faculty here with us. I did not introduce myself. I'm assuming everybody knows who I am. I'm Cherise Cardenas. I'm with the Carter School Graduate Student Services Department, and David is going to lead today's session. David is a career coach, and an alum of the program. He will talk a little bit about himself, but just wanted to let everyone know that today is a fantastic series, and David will kick it off today. Okay, thank you, David.
Thank you, Cherise. I am so pleased to be here. I am so pleased, especially to be here with Lindsey, Colette, and Dale, who have been students and colleagues who bring many years of experience as an ombuds. I hear ombudsman still, ombuds person. That word ombuds, though, we're going to kind of figure out what that is. That'll be one of the things that we're going to do. As Cherise was saying, we've decided to change a little bit about the career seminars we've been holding and had these career exploration sessions. And one of the reasons is that one of the things that I started to recognize, or we started to recognize, is that our graduates tend to fill in certain spaces on a consistent basis. These spaces might be social justice or development or humanitarian or consulting. And one of the spaces is ombuds work. We just have a lot of master's degree students who gravitate to that. In some cases, they've gotten to the work before they've come to us. Dale probably will tell his story a little bit. In other cases, it was as a student here, they were exposed to ombuds work. I think one of the factors here, at least I know in Dale and Colette's situation, is that because we are where the federal government is, ombuds exist throughout federal government. So you have a lot of Carter School graduates who will then find themselves in a federal agency and that'll be their avenue to this type of work. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to introduce our three guests today, and then we're going to have a period where they will talk about themselves, and then there'll be a period we'll have a little bit of a conversation among the four of us, and then most importantly, there will be a period at the end where you can ask questions about their work. So without further ado, I'm going to give brief introductions, and then I'm going to turn to each one of them so that they can talk a little bit more about their work. So I'm going to start off with Colette Carmouche. Colette was a student of mine. I'm so glad to see Colette. She is an ombuds with Harvard University. She was previously an ombuds specialist at the Transportation Security Administration. Is that right? Or is it agency administration, right? And a conflict management specialist at the Department of Interior. She received her master's degree from the Carter School in 2017. She's also an associate certified coach, and she certainly can talk about that if she wishes also. Lindsey Ensor. Lindsey and I go back many years because we worked together at the U.S. Institute of Peace. She's a 2006 master's degree graduate from the Carter School. She is currently an associate ombuds with the University of California, Davis. So Lindsey is on the West Coast. I'm also interested in finding out from Lindsey about West Coast culture and talking about how things are different on the West Coast than they are on the East Coast. One of it is that people dressed a lot more relaxed on the West Coast, among other things. So we can talk about that too. She has worked as a facilitator for Adventure Associates and an operations officer for management sciences of health. Dale Vergott is a senior ombudsman at the National Reconnaissance Office, currently assigned to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. He is a certified mediator and ombuds with the International Ombudsman Association. So also talking about organizations and associations that students can learn about is a good thing also for us to do today. He earned his master's from the Carter School in 2018 and an MBA from the University of Phoenix before that. And he has nearly 40 years of experience in the conflict resolution field, mostly as an ombuds. So I'm going to stop there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn to each of them. I'm really going to start it with Colette, spend a few minutes talking about yourself, just the work that you do. We're going to do that very quickly. And then I'll come back and we'll give you kind of 5 minutes to go more detailed on what you're doing. So Colette, just briefly introduce yourself, your name, your pronoun. I think I covered some other things, and then we'll go from there.
Great. Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks for having me. I'm Colette Carmouche. As David mentioned, I'm an ombuds at Harvard, so I work with faculty, students, staff, researchers, anyone with some connection to Harvard, helping them navigate issues, concerns related to their work or studies. And I've been here about 2 years. Pronouns she, her, hers. What else? I think you covered it. Graduated 2017. Yeah.
We'll come back. Lindsey.
How to unmute here. Nice to see you all here, and thanks for having me. My name's Lindsey Ensor. My pronouns are she, her. And for the past 5 years, I've been working at the University of California at the Davis campus. We have a number of campuses throughout California. The Davis campus is about an hour east of the San Francisco Bay Area. And like Colette, we at UC Davis in the Ombuds office, we serve pretty much anyone who has a connection to UC Davis. We have a main campus, an academic campus. We also have a health campus where we have a teaching hospital, number of different programs there. So I'm part of a great ombuds team there. I really enjoy the work, and just like Colette, we do, and we help people navigate issues and concerns in the workplace and their studies, in research, a whole host of different kinds of issues in a confidential setting. So it's a bit about what we do.
And your pronouns?
She, her.
Thank you. And Dale.
Hi, thank you, David. My name is Dale Vergott. Thank you so much for that nice introduction, David. It's really a pleasure to be back and chatting with some students. So my pronouns are he, him. I currently, well, as David alluded to, I've been in the military and federal sector now for a combined coming up on 40 years, 21 of which was with the military, and now going on 20 years now with the federal government. So in my current practice as an ombudsman, I'm primarily assigned to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Within the intelligence community, there's 17 other organizations. You can always recognize them by the 3-letter acronyms. So you got the FBI, CIA, NSA, so forth. That's how you recognize the IC organizations. And one of them is NRO, National Reconnaissance Office. And as part of a developmental curriculum that they hold or have for seniors, is they kind of send us out to the other sub-IC agencies for a period of 2 to 3 years, just to get some additional broadening experience and also help them enhance their current conflict resolution programs. So right now I am currently doing that. I've been doing it now for about my 5th month with the NRO and enjoying it. Our customers, as a practicing organizational ombudsman, and I'll talk to you about the different types of ombudsman we kind of have in the government, but as an organizational ombudsman, my clients are generally from the military branches, contractors. So we have a lot of contractor support, and government employees. And we service all 3 areas because typically those are the people assigned to the IC agencies. And I'll get a little bit more into practice.
Yeah, we'll go back to the detail. What is your pronouns?
He, him.
let me go back then to Colette, and then we'll give you then each of you kind of more 5 minutes to develop it out a little bit. Colette, speak specifically about your work and what is an ombuds? I'm going to ask everybody that question. Like, what is exactly is an ombuds? Because it's kind of elusive sounding. What does it have to do with Sweden? That's always my question because it is a Swedish word. What drew you to the work? What is your work? What drew you to the work? And think about how your degree assisted you and where you are today. And I'm always interested in the role of networking and mentoring. What kind of role has that played for you, Colette? And then same thing to Lindsey, and then we'll finish with Dale. So go ahead, Colette.
Okay, great. So yeah, I can say a little bit, touch on all of those things. For me, I guess what attracted me, and I'll get into what the role is. Before I came into this work, I was working also in the federal government. I had 13 years total, and I was doing different things, but I was doing diversity, equity, inclusion work, specifically really having dialogues around race, other lines of difference. And that was what really got the conflict resolution bug in me and inspired me to come to the Carter School, pursue my degree there. And as I continued in the process, I actually learned about ombudsing from another Carter School alum, Scott Deo. And so that really opened up to me all the different places you could go with a degree like this one. And I think what got me interested in it was the idea, and how I see ombuds work is this what I see as a dual mandate, one around working with individuals to help them addressing their issues or concerns, but also this organizational work and helping the organization to be more aware of systemic issues that may be there. Another way of thinking about it, I think we covered this in one of your classes, David, but the idea of values in practice versus espoused values, I think that's a big part for me of the organizational work, is helping to shine the light for the organization to think about, okay, these are the values that we're espousing, and this is what's in practice, and how do we have those better aligned? Do you want to work on any gaps that may be there? So that's a little bit about how I see the work. And in terms of where it comes from, Swedish word or Scandinavian, I believe it translates to representative, but it started a long time ago. There are different iterations of ombuds work. So I'm an organizational ombuds as well as my colleagues, but in Sweden, there is this classical ombuds where they were interfacing with citizens and the government. And so I think there was more of an advocacy role that exists in organizational ombuds work, but I'll let my colleagues here pick up on any of that. What else? I think in terms of networking, I kind of mentioned Scott earlier. I think that plays a big role. It's a small community. So for me, it's helped me learn more about what the role is, how to approach it. Definitely have a number of colleagues that I'll call. Hey, can you help me think through this? What kind of strategies or approaches have you applied to this? And as well as jobs and networking. Those connections have definitely helped me get my foot in the door in places, just using the informal networks there. So definitely would hope people will use the network within the Carter School. Don't be shy about giving us a call or reaching out on LinkedIn. Happy to help there.
Yeah. Let me ask you two questions, and I might ask everybody this same question. So the first question is, you made a leap from government to Harvard. I mean, you went from kind of like every government service, which, is a good place to be. And you said, I'm leaving government service. I'm going to go into education. I mean, tell us about what was the motivation there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few different motivations. I think for me, I was at year 13. And so I started in government right after I graduated from undergrad. And because I hadn't experienced other sectors, it felt like the moment for me to decide if I'm going to leave and try something else, like now's the time. I was not yet at the point of no return where I've invested so much time and all of the benefits there. So it felt like a good time to go and explore something else. I had been interested in doing ombuds work in different sectors, including higher education. And it has been really interesting because, at least in my role in government, we were only working with staff, and not to diminish that, like it's an only thing, but it adds many different dimensions when you're also working with students, faculty, these different populations. I do find it challenging. It really pushes you to think differently, to think creatively, to not only work with these different populations, but the kinds of issues and problems that they have. And so, yeah, I think those were a couple of the motivations for me to take the leap.
So my next question is, which I'll ask everyone, and given the nature, the confidential nature of what you do, so certainly not asking you to break that, but what would you do in a typical day? I mean, not only what you're working on, but what skills are you applying? That is, what are the types of issues? And then what are the techniques, skills, and abilities you're applying to that situation? Like, you could just pick a day, like what you did yesterday, or think about some of the things you've been doing lately. Give us a taste of it.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm just kind of thinking about what last week was like for me. I think so. Some broad categories. One is just meeting with individuals. So a lot of listening skills obviously is involved in that. I think helping people to not only so that they feel understood, but also that I truly understand what is going on. I think sometimes we can problem solve or diagnose an issue too quickly. So being really careful and deliberate just to understand what the concerns are. I did some facilitation work last week, so I was helping two people that were in conflict with one another. And those are moments that can be really impactful when I'm able to help people to have a conversation they didn't feel like they could have on their own, or maybe would have waited until it escalated a lot further. So having facilitation or mediation skills is also another important component. I did some outreach, essentially having meet and greets. So at a place like Harvard, it's very decentralized. So it's almost like I can never quite know or meet all the people that I need to in order to do the work well. And so was able to connect with some people I hadn't met with to share the work that I do, get to better know the role that they play in the organization. Also plan some training. So that's another important part that we play here is we do training around conflict resolution skills and approaches. And so that was another part of my week last week.
So training faculty, staff, students?
Yes.
Wow. Okay, nice. All right. So let me go then to Lindsey. And the same kind of tell us a little bit what drew you to work, how you would define it, how your degree assisted you, a little bit about networking, and then I'm really interested in hearing about your day and what your day is like. Oh, and almost in your case also, Lindsey, you kind of came to an ombuds position more recent than other people because you were doing other types of conflict resolution work, and kind of talk about how you graduated up to that. And tell us a little bit about working in California. I want to hear about that.
Thanks, David. Yeah, so I did come to Ombuds work mid-career. I started after undergraduate in the US Senate and worked there for a few years. I did my graduate degree at what was then the Institute for Conflict Analysis and Resolution. And at the time, I really wanted to work more internationally. I ended up working for the U.S. Institute of Peace, and then went on to work in international development, working on large complex international development project at Management Sciences for Health that, you know, needed some conflict management embedded within the kind of the project management there. And then went on to doing, you know, at the time I was also doing some dialogue facilitation, some mediation, and so getting to do some more practice there as well. And then finally kind of went on to, after starting a family, came out to California and was working at a team building and leadership training company. That was at a point where then I kind of to take stock of what I really was enjoying in all of these different things that I'd done, because I definitely had bounced around a little bit. I'd been in, you know, government, nonprofit, then for-profit, and various different things. And so at the time I was looking at Ombuds work and was really excited by the three things that Colette just kind of called out in terms of what the day-to-day looked like, and the kinds of skills and the things that the work involved. And so, you know, speaking of networking and mentoring, that was key in me making that bridge in between what I had been doing and Ombuds work. I started doing informational interviews with people in the area in the UC system, the University of California system, who are Ombuds. And just, it furthered my interest in that kind of work. And one of the things I will just say was really noteworthy was that people who had been doing the work for many years, like Colette and Dale, and I don't know if this is true for you both, but all the Ombuds that I spoke with really spoke about how much they really enjoyed the work. Still, after many years of doing it, it was still fulfilling. It still felt like valuable, important work. And that wasn't necessarily true of all the different people that I'd kind of encountered in my career so far. And so that I thought really spoke highly of the kind of sustainability, longevity, interesting work that Ombuds do, and how people enjoy the work. So I did a lot of networking. I went to some, I went to a small, it's not really a conference, we call it a caucus here in California, of Ombuds in higher ed, but it really brings people from all over and different sectors of Ombuds work too. And that's where I met somebody who took me on as a mentor, unofficially. She had been working in Colorado as an Ombuds for many years, still works there, and just unofficially was interested in helping me get into the field. And so she met with me monthly and walked through just sort of made up visitor scenarios with people we might meet with. And we just talked about them, how you know, the Ombuds principles might apply here from the International Ombuds Association. And we just kind of I started learning a little bit there. And so that was really key, that mentorship and meeting people in the field. And then eventually I was able to get into a position. And I, you know, as much as the work that I had done was transferable, the mediation skills, listening skills, facilitation skills, as well as some of the training and kind of more organizational development, but some of that stuff also came into play as well. So that was all transferable, and yet moving into higher ed, I had a lot to learn. So it was a steep learning curve, as well as, you know, ombudsing in particular. It's a very unique role with, you know, following principles, the principles in terms of how we do our work as a confidential, you know, as an organizational ombuds, being a confidential, impartial, informal, and independent resource. So an interesting kind of overlap of the ways, those things with things that I'd done in other areas like mediation and facilitation, things like that. So I hope that answers the question.
Tell me about a day. Tell me about get a little granular about what you do in a particular day.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's very similar to Colette, you know, since we also work at a university, so I don't want to be too redundant, but it's very similar. A lot of what I do is meeting one-on-one. We schedule 90-minute sessions with people that we call visitors, people that use our services confidentially. And a lot of it is really active listening skills. And I love what you said, Colette, about really not trying to kind of diagnose the problem, but really get to understand what's going on for the person, what their key interests are, their concerns are, their needs, and what's happening. And then help them understand, what options they have. So that's, and then kind of, that involves some conflict coaching oftentimes. I do some facilitation as well in terms of like mediation is a big part of what we do. But a lot of what we're doing one-on-one in a day is meeting one-on-one. And then interspersed with that are, some of the mediations, as well as facilitating workshops and doing presentations, just like Colette. So doing outreach presentations about what is an ombuds office, because we're also a large dispersed institution. And, like maybe some of you here, trying to figure out, what does an ombuds do? What is this? What service is this? And how can people, how does it help people? Because it's kind of a mysterious thing. Some people say, oh, is it an acronym? And so we try to help people understand and what it is that we do, how we can help them in sticky situations, difficult situations that they might encounter, and how we work and how we're different and complementary to the other resources that are out there within the university system. And workshops, that's a lot of what we do when I'm not ombudsing. I'm either preparing or delivering a workshop on conflict resolution, conflict management skills, either online or in person, sometimes to the entire campus community, or sometimes it's for a particular work unit that has requested something. So that's also part of it, is meeting with a group that might want us to come in and do a workshop and trying to understand what their needs are, and would a workshop be a good fit for that, or would there be some other ways in which we might be able to be helpful to whatever dynamics are going on in the group.
Are you working with students?
Yes, so I work with students, undergraduate, graduate. We work with postdoctoral scholars, researchers. Yeah, we work with doctors, we work with nurses, all sorts of different folks, even people who might not have a role at the university, but might have a concern with the university itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
So people responding to people's complaints and concerns and so forth, that's a role too.
Yeah, but like Colette said, we're also, we're not in an advocacy role as an organizational ombuds. We're there as an impartial resource to help people understand what kinds of options they have and help them think through what they might do, rather than kind of advocating for somebody's concerns.
What's it like working in California?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, it's interesting because I will say that some of the challenges that come up are different communication styles. And sometimes people self-identify as, hey, I'm from the East Coast, I'm a pretty direct communicator. And it's kind of tough to communicate in this environment where it seems like that's not, it's not always the preference. So there's maybe more of an indirect communication style, or a little bit of a, I don't know, I don't know how to describe it, but there's this sort of way in which people might self-identify as having a communication style that's more West Coast versus East Coast. But that's an interesting thing that comes up in the work that I do sometimes. But I'd say, we have a very diverse community in the university. People are coming from all over, internationally as well as domestically. So that's one thing I really love about the university. And so I don't know, I mean, certainly generally it might be more of a laid back culture, certainly compared with, I've spent many years in DC, and I still like a blazer. But yeah, I'd say it is somewhat more laid back, maybe in terms of dress, maybe in some other ways, but I think there's a lot of diversity as well.
It's interesting because our graduates are everywhere, right? And sometimes we don't have that conversation of what it's like to work in a part of the world or the country, and how that may be different than somewhere else. We seem to be very DC centric, and we shouldn't be, because we need to find out what it's like and draw people to those parts of the country or world. Thank you, Lindsey. Dale, so tell us about your journey, your work, mentoring, networking, and I'm also interested in what does your day look like too?
So I will try to cover some things, and I'll be all over the place. So please keep me on track. And I love it that you'll reel me back in with any questions, specifically questions, David. So what drew me into this whole career field of conflict resolution really all started back when I was in the military. I would say that it started and it evolved to really having a deep passion for helping people in a crisis. That started earlier on in my military career when there were a lot of race relations type of things happening in the military. So I elected to transition my career series into equal employment opportunity, EEO. Which stresses for fair and equity, treating people fairly and equitable, regardless of race, religion, and so forth. So I did that, and I did that for the last 8 years of my military career. And then after I retired from the military, I knew I wanted to transition into the government, and this is what I tell a lot of individuals who are currently in the military to be thinking about. There's only so many sectors that you can go into government service that are transferable from military to government. And so while you're in the military, they should be looking for those sectors if they intend to transition into the government rather than private practice or the public sector versus the public sector. So it started off with EEO. And so I built on that by going into the equal opportunity realm with the federal government, which isn't too different from the military. And once I transitioned to EEO, if anyone ever knows anything about the equal opportunity process, it's a very long process when someone feels like they're being discriminated against in the workplace. And that can go on for as long as 2 to 3 years, where you're waiting to hear from an administrative judge only to get a resolution in your complaint. Well, when I was working in that field, I used to look at some of the complaints and I would say, there's got to be an easier way. I'm looking at the complaints where someone might say, I feel like I was being discriminated against because my supervisor didn't say good morning to me. And I would think, if I could just bring these individuals together, I bet you I can have them have a conversation and really get to the root of the problem and hopefully get it resolved. Well, turns out I was pretty good at that. And so I was able to start reducing the complaints, the formal complaints we had in the agencies dramatically. In fact, it was so successful that I think I even have it in my bio that when I first started off with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. I did a few years there. I was a direct hire into the Defense Intelligence Agency. And that's where I met one of our new directors. After being there for about 8 years, I met the new director in the bathroom, of all places. And he said, hey, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm currently in charge of our EEO's Alternative Dispute Resolution Program because I was resolving conflicts. And he said, well, what else can we do to try to get issues resolved at the lowest level? And I said, I'm glad you asked. Well, there's this thing that's going around in the government where they are practicing an ombudsman work, which is a little bit of ADR. And it's also what I framed as a one-stop shop to triage all complaints that are coming in, regardless if they are EEO, IG, Inspecting General, or whether they're a HR issue, a human resource issue, or just any type of organizational type problems that you typically hear about. And I said, we should have a one-stop office. I think we need to create an ombuds office. And by that time, I had already gone to become certified as an IOA, International Ombudsman Association practitioner. And I think Lindsey and Colette may have touched upon some of the standards of practice, and I'll talk more about that if you want. But I created that. And then again, during our annual reviews, I started to see, and they started to see the dramatic decrease in formal complaints. So it became a great practice to have for the organization. And then, you know, the word of mouth just goes from, again, as I told you initially, there were 17 agencies. So each agency started saying, oh, I want one of those. And so they started to build on that. And next thing you know, a lot of the agencies are either currently they have an ombuds practice, or they are developing one. So I got at the ground level there, and I think that all the things that I've done in my career help lead up to being a successful ombudsman. And that's something else I want to talk to the students here today about. And you know, sometimes it's not always the best practice of going straight into a practice. I think Lindsey or Colette can attest to this. There's not a lot of positions that you can just say, hey, I want to intern with this ombuds office to go into that career field. Sometimes it's good to go into other areas that can help you benefit as an ombudsman. And the practices that I've done, not knowing in hindsight, it's always 2020, but practicing as an EEO practitioner helped me not only to get into the government, because there's a lot more positions, but it also helps me when I'm talking to someone in a crisis and they feel like their back is up against the wall where they need to file an EEO complaint. I can actually help them peel back the layers and maybe talk them through that process and help them understand what it means. And many times I can talk them down off the limb, I guess, and resolve the issues more informally. My time working in the Inspecting General's office as a whistleblower ombudsman helped. My time working in HR, human resources, understanding the performance evaluations or the promotion process. All of those things contribute to what you're able to do as an ombudsman, because they're coming to you for advice, for assistance, for guidance. And so by you having all of that in your background helps you significantly. So I only say that to say being an ombudsman is a good career path, but going into some other areas that can help you be even more marketable is really going to be in your best interest. So in the end, you want to be value added. The ombudsman practice is a very, very powerful position. I can tell you that I answer directly to the director of the agency. And that's quite a pretty powerful thing. As Lindsey and Colette, they answer, I'm sure, directly to the president or the dean of the university. And so that's quite a powerful position to be in. And they always want to see you being value added. So you're constantly not only resolving problems, but you're raising issues that they need to be aware of so they can kind of get a grasp of what's happening in the organization. That's the difference between alternative dispute resolution, where you're only dealing with one-on-one person, interpersonal relationships that are severed to try to help mend those, versus on a bigger scale where you're dealing with the entire agency.
Can I ask you a follow-up on that, Dale? So if you see trends as an ombuds, you see this is happening, this continuously happening, that information to someone, and I'm sure Lindsey and Colette see the same thing, then from the top, results may be that there's something we need to be doing that we're not doing.
That's correct. And so one of the things that I'm always looking for are gaps in policies. Let me give you a quick example. So in my bio, you read that I was deployed to Afghanistan. While I got deployed to Afghanistan, I returned back, and it became apparent because some other people who trusted me and got to know me came back and said, I have a problem. And I said, okay, share what your problem is. They said, well, the government only allows individuals to carry a max of 340 hours of leave. If you get deployed, and they got deployed to Afghanistan, which is a war zone, they accumulate more hours in excess of 340. So sometimes they come back with 450 hours, sometimes even 500 hours. And what our organization was doing was they were literally taking away all of those hours to reduce them back to 340. And when I heard that, I was like, okay, so our policy says that they should be doing it, right? Rightfully so. That's an HR policy. And I was saying that doesn't make the common sense test. So I had the ability to go straight to the director and say, think about it. We're sending good people, good employees to the war zone. They come back, they've done wonderful work for a year or two even. And now we say, thank you for going to a war zone representing your country. But because you've accumulated 100 hours in excess of what our policy says you should have, we're just going to take them away. That did not seem right to me. So we were able to change the policy and go back retroactively and award people their 100 hours or 150 hours or even pay if they've left the government. And we went back, I think, 4 years. That's the power of this job, finding gaps in policies, or because policies are written by people like just me and you. They really are. And and a problem doesn't become a problem until it becomes a problem, your problem. And you see, this doesn't make sense to me. And it might not, but if you don't have someone speaking up and saying, okay, does this really make the common sense test? And most times, even if you do find an employee who says that, they don't have access to the highest positions of the organization to have influence.
I want to move into kind of a broader conversation, but I want to ask you one last question, Dale, and then we're going to have a conversation.
Okay.
One of the things also is that you were working in the field before you came to the Carter School, right?
That's right.
Which I think is interesting also. Tell us a little bit about that process of thinking about going back to school and how that changed the work that you ended up doing. Right. I remember myself, I was an attorney. Then I went and got conflict resolution training. And then I really changed as an attorney as a result of it.
Right. So, as everybody out there is trying to get their education, it's all about credentials. It's all about showing showing other people that you are a subject matter expert in your field. And it's all about getting credentials. So going to a well-known school of conflict like George Mason University has with their Carter School, and I have to say, and I'm not just saying this, but David, you were actually one of the most influential persons for me, because you weren't just a professor talking in theory. You were someone who was actually practicing. You were actually still working. And to this day, by the way, for anyone who's not signed up to his monthly newsletters, you should be, because they're very informative. That, I think, resonated the most with me. And then I had some candid conversations with you as well about your practice and the things you've done or the strategies you've used. And that was something that I was able to take back with me as well. But like I said, more importantly, it's all about credentials. And tell me why I should value you and what you bring to the table, because there's 20 other people who have been to the school as well. What sets you apart from others? And so I needed to do that for my self-growth.
Thank you. And you're very kind. But I mean, that is an important point to think about, is that it says something about the credential of the Carter School, right? And that, and all I know, this is anecdotally, is that Carter School graduates, master's degree graduates, are very strong within the Ombuds, the federal government Ombuds community, right? I mean, you have to have ADR throughout the federal government, and we are occupying a lot of those spaces. And I think that's important to know. So let me, if Lindsey and Colette could open your mics, let's just do a couple conversation kind of questions and those kind of things. First of all, I want to ask Lindsey and Colette and Dale if they want to ask each other questions, right? Is there anything that they and think about, or maybe following up with what someone else said, let's do that for a few minutes. I got a couple just general questions, then we'll go to everybody else. So I'm just going to leave it open for a minute.
Yeah, I can
Go ahead.
hop in there just to go off what Dale was saying a little bit in terms of finding those policy gaps. I think in my experience, I think of it or frame it sometimes as unintended consequences. You know, we have a policy, we're not aware that it has this result. And so I think that's another part of these skills is in doing this work, how do you also frame it to the organization and leadership so that they're open to hearing it and not perceiving it as complete criticism or shutting it down, but how can we open up the conversation? So that's another way that I also think of it. Just wanted to add that in to add on to what Dale was sharing.
Well, if I might build on that a little bit too, I think there's also, in addition to policies, kind of just practices that end up kind of happening and becoming cultural norms, that then we can also help the organization understand how that's impacting people. For example, people with more marginalized identities, for example, ending up taking on higher workloads as faculty, for example. You know, things like that, you know, that we see, not, you know, this is, I'm not speaking just for my institution, but, you know, it's a thing that we see happening. And so there's ways that we can help the institution understand that as well, in the ways that Colette was describing too, where it's not shaming, it's not, you know, it's just inviting people into a conversation around, you know, what's going on here and how might we look into this and learn more about it and find ways creatively to address it.
Let me ask you all a question with regard to, you just came through the pandemic. Life was different then. Life was different for your work then, I would imagine. Now life is different again. Any residual issues out of the pandemic that you're seeing? Once again, you know, working from home and things of that nature, and how things are different. Any one of you, what are you thinking?
I can jump in and say that one of the primary things that I've seen that has been evolving and different is the fact that more organizations are now doing alternative dispute resolutions or mediations virtually rather than in person. So that's probably one of the biggest changes that I've seen happen. I've had to do a number of them myself virtually. They're a little bit different. They take some getting used to. I can just say that that's probably one of the biggest things, but regardless of whether it's in person or virtually, as a practitioner, one of the biggest skills that you can continue to evolve and learn on your own is to become a good listener. If you find yourself speaking more than you're listening, you should probably practice at it more. I always say I like to listen to understand, not to respond. And that's something that I routinely tell people that, you know, when they ask, what does it take to be a good ombudsman or an ADR practitioner? You really, really have to listen well and understand what's being said and hear them out to understand all the details and nuances of their issues and concerns so you can help them.
Anything from the pandemic, Lindsey or Colette?
One thing that comes to mind for me in terms of issues, I think mental health, burnout. I still hear from a lot of people that because it was such an intensive time, people are still sort of coming out of that, or there was something about the pandemic that either magnified existing either mental health issues or things like ADHD or other disabilities, and people are still figuring out how to cope with that. So it feels like a new normal that perhaps we're moving into, and that's, I think, been a shift in thinking about how do I support people as an ombuds that are in those places where, again, we're not mental health practitioners, but hearing a lot of concerns around those areas. And so I think that's something that is still lingering for sure.
I would imagine you're a little bit of a resource person too, because you can refer somebody
Yep, absolutely.
And resources, then they're not familiar with them, I would think, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Lindsey, anything out of the pandemic you've noticed?
Yeah, well, I definitely want to echo what Colette said there in terms of mental health. I would say too that in addition to that, what I've seen is, kind of the impact of people having joined teams when the teams weren't co-located. So they were hybrid, they were remote. And so they didn't have a lot of that day-to-day connection as humans. And when things get fraught, there's not as much of that connection and trust built up. And that comes up as a theme with teams, even as they kind of come back together, even a day or two or a few a week. But some teams have never come back to kind of be physically co-located and have continued to be hybrid or have continued to be almost entirely remote. And so that can be part of it. And there's not to say that there's not also really great benefits of it. And, one of the things is, we like Dale was saying, we've done a lot of mediation remotely, but we also continue to get a high degree of interest in people using our services remotely. So by Zoom or phone. So in a way, there's been benefits with that, but then also just the challenge for building and maintaining relationships when people aren't seeing a lot of each other, and especially when they didn't start out as colleagues until the pandemic.
Why don't we turn now to questions? And we have 10 or so folks in the room with us. If you've got a question, just raise your hand. Alafia's got the first question, and then tell us if it's to everybody or if it's just one person in particular. So Alafia, where are you?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, and nice that my students follow my sign up for something.
We can't get enough of you.
Go ahead, Alafia.
But my question is for everybody, and I wanted to know, basically, as an ombuds, what do you see on a day-to-day working level as challenges or weaknesses of your position as an ombuds?
So who would you like to go first, David?
Go ahead, Dale. You go.
Okay, so weaknesses, I think, is the trust factor. So I'm always meeting with people, as so is Lindsey and Colette. They are too. But I think it's huge to develop relationships and trust when you're meeting with not only the seniors in your organization, but people as well. They need to know that they can come to you. And when you say, one of the, going back to the standards of practice of independence, confidentiality, neutrality, and informality, those are the primary four that the government goes by. When I say I will listen to you, I will hear what you're saying, and I will not use your name or I will not act unless you give me permission to do so, I won't say anything. And I won't use your name to report back up to the director. That's been pretty huge. And we never seem to get enough.
Are you saying that people don't believe you sometimes? Is that one of the issues?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes it's hard to develop that trust because they just don't know or they don't trust the organization. So by you telling them, I can offer you confidentiality, just like the Inspecting General's office, for the exception of if you are going to tell me that you're going to do harm to yourself or to others with imminent, or if you're imminent threat to do so, or if you're committing something fraud, waste, or abuse, I am obligated to report that. Other than that, everything is game, off limits. So just building that trust, I think, is the hardest part about this job.
Lindsey, Colette?
I guess I would answer it from the vantage point of maybe the criticisms that we get or what others perceive to be a weakness or challenge. And I think it's related to the confidentiality. I think sometimes we can hear from people in HR or compliance functions that are concerned about our confidentiality and worry that issues are going to go unaddressed because we're not mandated reporters except for some, few exceptions. So that's definitely a critique we get. And sometimes that can take place. I think in my role, for the most part, when people do have a really serious issue, it doesn't happen often where they don't then act on it. But there are sometimes occasions where I would maybe prefer that someone do something with that information, and so that can be difficult. We do have some ways around that in terms of, can we find a way to raise this general theme or raise something in an anonymous way? So that's one way that we respond to that challenge.
Sometimes you
That's
feel
a great
you've got
question.
you feel like you've got something you've got to do something with, but you don't have permission to do anything with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's frustrating, I would imagine. Lindsey?
Well, a few different thoughts here, but I see other hands raised too, so I don't want to take up much more time. But I think one of the challenges, and maybe this kind of goes along with the theme you were talking about, Dale, too, which is the trust building. I think sometimes people might come to use the Ombuds office services with a certain kind of desire to have somebody take it off their plate in a way, you know, and fix it for them. And so sometimes, you know, just hearing a little bit of an opening around we're confidential and we're impartial, you know, might set that tone a little bit of, you know, kind of beg the question for people, well, then what can you do? and so then it become, you know, then it's a little bit of this, you know, again, trust building and relationship building there around, here's what we can do. Here are a lot of the different ways that we can work, and we can help you in a variety of different ways, just within those kind of that lane.
Parameter. Yeah.
And I want to go to Mylene next, but to follow up on that is sometimes people will come to you and say, can you take care of it for me?
Right. Yeah.
Right. And that's not what an ombuds does. Is I'm going to assist you in taking care of it, but I can't take care of it for you. Right.
Unless it's shuttle diplomacy. If they're specifically requesting shuttle diplomacy, which might be for, let's say, a performance evaluation for a brand new employee who's intimidated to go to their senior director.
Okay.
They might feel more comfortable for me taking that problem or that issue with them, whether they want to be anonymous or not.
Okay. Let me go to Mylene then.
Yes, hi. Thank you all for being here. This has been very helpful and informative. My question is for all of you, and actually it's a two-part question. One is, you mentioned an IOA certification, and I was just wondering if that goes in conjunction with a master's degree, or those two separate things. I was just curious if it's required to get that certification. And then the other question, I know you mentioned, Dale, that being a good listener is definitely one of the you know, requirements in being an ombuds. Was just curious to hear two other qualities outside of being a good listener.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll try to.
You talk. It's IOM, isn't it? It's not IOA, right?
So it's the IOA, International Ombudsman Association.
Oh, IO. Okay, I'm sorry. IOA.
It is a separate professional organization. For you to be certified, they have a set of requirements. Anyone can go on, and you can look them up on the open source internet. That you can look at their certification requirements to become a certified practitioner. But part of that is not only taking a proctored exam at one of their universities during their annual conferences, but they also want you to be practicing in an ombuds field, which, you know, you might be able to do, or something in the conflict resolution arena, which you could be able to do in any one of the organizations, whether it's private or public sector. You could easily kind of get more experience working in that area. So I think that's the only requirement. The test and actually working or practical experience. The other, when we talked about skill sets, yes, I gave you being a listener as one of them. The other one is, I think, the ability to manage your emotions, I think, is really important. You got to be able to, you're going to have people who are very emotional. People are really upset when, you know, this happened or that happened to them. So you got to be able to have a calming response, or to allow them to calm down to talk through this with you. So I think the ability to have that, and let's see, I think the one other skill set that's really critical is your ability to remain neutral. It's real easy to listen to someone who comes to you with a problem, right? And then you start running with it. But I'm here to tell you, as David and Colette and Lindsey could attest to, there's always three sides to every story. Everybody's going to tell you what they want you to hear, but there's always another version. And so you have to go to the other party or parties and you have to get their story or their narrative. And then it becomes like a jigsaw puzzle. You start putting the pieces together to formulate your picture, and then you find out where the gaps are, where are the missing pieces to formulate a picture for yourself. And that could help you in more exploring either questions that weren't asked or what additional questions need to be asked to formulate your whole thing. So I say just remaining neutral is very critical, because if you lose neutrality, then that kind of loses your credibility. And believe me, people will see that. That's my answer.
Lindsey, Colette?
Yeah, I can jump in quickly, just back to the IOA comment. I think that taking the training is probably even more valuable than the certification. At least that's been my experience in terms of being successful in applying for jobs. So there's, I believe it's maybe 32 hours or a 40-hour training that you can take called Foundations. And that's often, people will look for that when you're applying for jobs, is to see whether you've taken that coursework. And I think in terms of skill sets, I would also add being able to quickly build rapport with people is another one. So those relationship building skills, I think, is really critical when you're meeting with visitors that come to talk to you, or leadership. A lot of times we need to have challenging conversations. So being able to put people at ease and quickly build rapport is another important skill.
Yeah, and I just wanted to call out, I put in the chat the link to the Foundations training that Colette was mentioning, as well as the link to the IOA for those who are interested. And I would echo what Colette said about the Foundations training. You'll often see that in a job posting, that's I don't know if it's always a requirement of the candidate, but at least a preferred thing that comes up a lot. And I would just add to kind of what Dale and Colette said. I think, maintaining our impartiality is really key, because we're human. We have our own identities. We have our own biases. We have, we're people. And, in addition to, the kind of, problems that people will present to us, and kind of what might jump out at us. So kind of maintaining that, but while also being able to connect empathetically with somebody that we're working with, because I find that, not only is the listening important to understanding where somebody's coming from, but if they don't feel listened to, if they don't feel like you're connecting to what challenges they're facing in some way, then as you try to work with them around maybe exploring some different moves in conflict than they've tried before, they may not be as open to going and, kind of exploring those different ideas and options as they might otherwise, if you were able to kind of, demonstrate that listening and empathy, as well as maintaining that impartiality. So it's a very, it's kind of a needle to thread there in a way.
I'll also give a plug real quick for those who are looking or interested in looking at the different types of vacancies that come up. There's also a website called the Ombuds blog. That is a huge resource for looking at vacancies or other information about the career field itself.
And I would also imagine for Colette and Dale in particular, since you've had government job, USA Jobs, if I went,
That's right. That's right.
Those types of things also work.
That's right.
Any other questions? So let me ask another question, and then we'll kind of wrap it up then. So my question is, looking back on your Carter School experience, you're talking to a group of students, right? And they're taking courses and they're trying to figure out what are some things that they could be doing now, either in the courses they're taking, the experiences they might be seeking. What would you recommend?
Please shut me down if I'm talking too much, but I believe looking at internships, if you're able to find an internship, those can be huge. I can tell you with the intelligence community, you can go onto some of their websites. Let's say, I don't know, FBI.gov or one of the other organizations. They have internship positions while people are in school. And one of the biggest advantages, if you live in the DC area, and you don't have to live in the DC area to necessarily get the internship, but a lot of those internships are paid internships, and they will process you for a top secret clearance as well, which is a pretty vital and critical thing if you're living in the DC area and want to be a part of the government. It's not mandatory for all government agencies, but if you want to focus on the intelligence community, that is a requirement.
So internships, I'll plug that because we do have a Ombuds internship with the IMF, right? I don't know if Sharice is still there. So
Yep, we do.
we're there you go, right? So Lindsey and Colette, what would you offer as advice while they're students?
Yeah, just to add a little bit to Dale's point, if there's a way that I don't know if it's still a requirement to have a practicum or a thesis, but if that's an opportunity to create some additional Ombuds experience or focus, if you want to do a thesis focusing it on Ombuds experience so you can connect with other people in the field, I think those are great door openers to get your foot in there. And I think for me too, one thing I benefited a lot from was a lot of the practice-based courses. That helped me a ton because there's not a lot of training related to that. You know, specifically for ombuds, usually you got to do a facilitation training or mediation training or coaching all separately. So taking advantage of that, all of those courses were really beneficial to me in the day-to-day work I do now.
And I will point out that half the students in this room are in my facilitation class.
Excellent.
Lindsey, what would you recommend?
I think Colette and Dale have touched on the key things that I would say as well. I'd say, you know, some ombuds do less and some do more of the kind of training and workshop types of things from what I've heard. And I know in our office, we do quite a bit of training and workshops. So I would say if there's also a way to kind of develop those skills, practically speaking, if you don't already have them in some way, you know, giving a little, even if it's just developing a little webinar on, you know, 1 to 3 takeaways around conflict management, things like that, being able to kind of put into relatable terms, conflict resolution, core concepts and practices, things like that. I also use a lot of that in my work with people one-on-one too. So I think there's a lot of crossover there. So I would just add that, but as much as you can possibly do and take advantage of opportunities to build those practical applications and skills.
I would also add, David, that, you know, looking at some of the nonprofit agencies that need work or assistance in their alternative dispute resolution practices out in the community, a lot of times they'll provide the training as long as you provide the hours for them. You also have the court system that also would provide training if you want to assist in some of their court cases. If you have the time, usually it's Monday through Friday, and it's, you know, during court hours, but a lot of times they'll send you through the training. You can co-mediate and learn and build your skills there as well. Anything that evolves around conflict resolution and building your skills will always help you.
Yeah, a lot of graduates are working for like DC Open Doors and other kind of mediation, community mediation, and other types of mediation services. So we're kind of getting to the end here. So I'm going to do 2 things. One is, if you want to put your contact information And that would be great. And Dale, I'll put yours in your email if
Thank you.
be contacted with further questions. The other is I'm a big user of LinkedIn, so I would recommend, if you'd like, reach out. I know Lindsey and Colette. I don't know, Dale, how active you are on LinkedIn, but I know Lindsey and Colette are. The other thing is that Charisse put in the chat the next sessions that are coming up. So in 2 weeks, we're actually doing something that's more kind of traditional resume interview focused. But then our next session on a topic will be in March, and we're just going to look at federal life, life as a Fed. Now, I know Colette's had a Fed life and Dale has a Fed life, but we're going to look at kind of graduates who are working in other federal fields. We've got graduates who are working in the Department of Treasury and Department of State and places like that. Yeah, so we're going to kind of look at that, because the other thing is why do people like working for the federal government? So the last thing I would do then is, if you can, like, your send off, Lindsey, Dale, Colette, this is like your wisdom, like, oh, Lindsey said this to me, or Dale said this to me. What would be the last thing you'd offer? And then put your contact information in also if you want to, and then we'll close it out. So whoever wants to start, their last piece of advice.
Okay, I'll jump in and I'll go first. I say that a positive attitude, a good work ethic, and some of your tradecraft knowledge will equal to your success in your professional career as an ombudsman or conflict resolution practitioner.
Okay.
My contact information, I'm always available via email. I don't have a big presence. You'll find my name on LinkedIn, but because of where I work, I really try to limit my access online presence as much as possible. So really the best way to get me is through my email. If you want to set up a phone conversation, I'm happy to do so with anyone out there.
So I put your contact in there. Lindsey, yes. Or Colette, your sending off advice. Go ahead, Colette.
Yeah, it's tough. I feel like we kind of covered a lot of stuff. Maybe just to highlight or emphasize some of the things already is, don't be shy, right? I think I've benefited so much from other Carter alumni, and so I'm happy to pay it forward and talk with people it further. So don't be shy in terms of reaching out. You're welcome to add me on LinkedIn. If you could message and just say like, oh, we met at this session. It's hard for me to keep track of all the people that I come into contact with. But that's one thing. And the other thing that came to mind before is, one thing that I think is emerging in the ombuds field that I think is going to grow a lot is around restorative justice. And so taking advantage of local opportunities you have there. I know Carter School is doing a lot. I think that's going to expand probably over the next 5-10 years. And so taking advantage of the local resources is a great way to position yourself as well. And I'll put my email in the chat for folks.
Lindsey.
I would also say we're really glad to connect with anyone. Like I had mentioned before, networking was key for me as well. And a key way of understanding what it is that people do in their day-to-day work as an ombuds. So I'd be glad to talk with anybody more about that. And, I would say too, if just again, if there's any kind of way to develop, your skills that are going to be relevant in whatever you do, even if it's not an ombuds position, so many of the things that we study in the master's program, the PhD program, I think they're really relevant. And also all of those practical things that you can do on the side are so important to being able to kind of move into the career that you want. So all of the things, even though I jumped around a lot, all of those things that I did help me get into what I'm doing currently. And I love this work. I wish I'd come to it 15 years earlier. But all of those things were relevant. So I would say just take advantage of any possible networking opportunities you have and skill building in the practical sense there.
Thank you, Lindsey. Thank you, Dale. Colette had to drop off. It's been my honor to spend the last hour and 15 minutes with three eminent ombudsmen, ombuds. So thank you for being here, and graduates. I'm going to turn it over to Charisse then.
I just wanted to extend our gratitude and appreciation to the panel. We know that you're extremely busy. I'm sorry Colette had dropped off before I got an opportunity to thank her. Paying it forward, we appreciate it. We value your contribution and the work that you do. And, you know, this is something that we hope to continue and foster. And David and I feel strongly that this is a professional path that students can make, have a viable career, and really make a tremendous contribution in the institution that they want to support. And so getting an opportunity to share this with students and your experience is extremely appreciated and valued. Thank you, alum and students who were able to join us today. Thank you, David, my North Star. And that's it. We'll end off, and we'll definitely share the link for the video and more resources. Thank you.
I hope to see many of you in 2 weeks on the 27th, and then in March when we do our next program. So thank you.
Thank you.